What if the reason you can't lose weight has nothing to do with how hard you're trying? What if somewhere deep inside your body, hidden from every mirror and every scale, there's a layer of fat quietly sabotaging everything? Your energy, your hormones, your mood, even your ability to think clearly. Most people spend years fighting the wrong battle, cutting calories, doing more cardio, tightening their belts, both literally and figuratively, and still wondering why nothing seems to stick. But here's the truth that changes everything. The fat you can see is not the fat that's destroying you. The fat you can't see is. It's called visceral fat, and it doesn't sit politely just beneath your skin like a soft layer you might pinch on your stomach or your thighs. Instead, it wraps itself tightly around your most vital organs, your liver, your heart, your pancreas, your intestines, pressing against them like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave and keeps causing trouble. You can't feel it, you can't see it in a mirror. A tape measure will never find it, but your body knows it's there, and it has been sounding quiet alarms for years. The problem is, most of us don't recognize those alarms for what they are. Fatigue that won't lift, cravings that feel impossible to control, brain fog that makes even simple tasks feel exhausting. That's not weakness, that might be visceral fat running the show. Here's what makes visceral fat so uniquely dangerous and so different from any other fat in your body. It doesn't just sit there passively storing extra energy the way normal fat does. It behaves more like a rogue organ, one that was never supposed to be there, constantly pumping out inflammatory chemicals and disrupting the hormonal signals that your body depends on to function. Think of it like a spy embedded in your body's control center, quietly interfering with communications, distorting messages, and keeping your entire system in a low-grade state of chaos. Every decision your metabolism tries to make, visceral fat has already tampered with. And the longer it stays, the deeper that interference runs. But here is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. When visceral fat starts to break down, your body doesn't just get a little slimmer. It triggers something far more powerful and far more profound than simple weight loss. It initiates a full internal reconstruction, a biological reset that ripples through every organ, every hormone, every cell. This process doesn't announce itself with dramatic symptoms or sudden changes you can photograph. It begins silently, invisibly, in the deepest layers of your biology. And once it starts, it sets off a cascade of healing that most people never even knew their body was capable of. Understanding how this works doesn't just change how you think about fat, it changes how you think about your entire body. When your body senses an energy deficit, whether from fasting, from going longer between meals, or simply from running low on available glucose, it sends out a very specific internal signal. That signal is essentially a directive: go find fuel somewhere else. And visceral fat is the first to respond, not because it's the most convenient target, but because it sits closest to your vital organs and blood vessels, and it is extraordinarily sensitive to the metabolic hormones that carry that message. If your body were a city, visceral fat wouldn't be out in the suburbs quietly minding its own business. It would be right in the center of government, connected to every major decision being made. So when the call comes, it acts fast. What happens next is remarkable. Visceral fat breaks down and releases fatty acids directly into the bloodstream. And these aren't just calories looking for somewhere to go. They are urgent chemical messengers, traveling instantly to the liver, the muscles, the heart, and the pancreas, signaling a complete shift in strategy. The whole metabolic system pivots. The liver switches from glucose to fat as its primary fuel. The pancreas dials back its insulin output. Muscles begin preparing to burn fat instead of sugar. This is not a slow, grinding process. It happens with surprising speed, triggered by one event: the moment visceral fat flips that metabolic switch. All while you might simply be sitting quietly, feeling a little hungry, completely unaware that a revolution is underway inside you. Now let's talk about the hormonal story, because this is where things get deeply personal and deeply important.
Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone, and when visceral fat is high, cortisol tends to stay elevated, keeping your nervous system in a near constant state of alert. It's like your body is perpetually braced for a threat that never arrives, burning through resources, disrupting sleep, and making fat loss almost impossible because your body believes it needs those reserves to survive. But as visceral fat begins to shrink, something quietly extraordinary happens. Cortisol starts to loosen its grip. The nervous system finally exhales. Sleep deepens, fatigue lifts, and emotional responses soften in ways that feel almost inexplicable until you understand the biology behind them. Then there's insulin, the hormone responsible for managing your blood sugar. When visceral fat is high, your cells become resistant to insulin signals, essentially going deaf to its instructions. The result is chronically elevated blood sugar, relentless cravings for sugar and refined carbs, and a dramatically increased risk of type 2 diabetes. But as visceral fat recedes, insulin sensitivity improves markedly. Your cells start listening again. Blood sugar stabilizes naturally. And here's the part that surprises most people. The cravings don't just get easier to resist, they actually start to disappear. Not because of willpower or discipline, but because your body is no longer biologically desperate for quick sugar energy. The craving was a symptom, not a character flaw. And now the symptom is fading. Leptin is the hormone that tells your brain you've had enough to eat, and when visceral fat is high, that signal gets completely distorted. Your fat cells might be screaming "we're full" at the top of their lungs, but the brain simply doesn't hear it. The result is that you eat and never quite feel satisfied, not because you're greedy, but because the communication line is broken. As visceral fat breaks down, leptin sensitivity begins to restore itself. The brain starts receiving that fullness signal clearly again. You begin to feel naturally satisfied after meals without having to white-knuckle your way through every dinner. The exhausting mental war between hunger and willpower starts to quiet down, almost on its own. The liver is the first major organ to bear the weight of visceral fat breaking down, and what happens there is a masterclass in biological adaptation. As fatty acids flood in from melting visceral fat, the liver doesn't collapse under the load. It upgrades itself. Key enzymes responsible for burning fat and producing ketones ramp up their activity. The liver shifts from burning glucose to fat with remarkable efficiency, generating cleaner energy with fewer inflammatory byproducts. Liver enzymes that were previously elevated begin to normalize. Fatty liver, one of the most common and quietly dangerous conditions of our time, starts to reverse. The liver stops functioning as an overloaded storage unit and begins operating as the filtration and regulation center it was always designed to be. And the benefits don't stop at energy processing. The liver also manages the metabolism of hormones like estrogen, cortisol, and testosterone. When it's overloaded, these hormones back up in the system, causing imbalances that show up as mood swings, skin issues, brain fog, and disrupted cycles. As the liver clears its backlog, these hormones get processed efficiently again. Many people who start reducing visceral fat report clearer skin, greater emotional stability, and sharper mental clarity. They often attribute it to diet changes or getting more sleep. And while those things help, the deeper driver is the liver finally operating the way it was meant to. A 2023 study from the Washington University found that people who practiced intermittent fasting for just 8 weeks saw a 25% reduction in liver enzyme levels and measurable improvements in fatty liver on MRI scans. The liver doesn't need rescuing, it needs space to heal. Visceral fat doesn't just disrupt hormones, it is, at its core, a chronic inflammation machine. Every single day, visceral fat cells release inflammatory chemicals called cytokines, including TNF-alpha and IL-6, that push your body into a prolonged state of internal conflict. This inflammation is never dramatic or obvious. It's low and persistent, like a slow-burning fire that never quite goes out, quietly damaging tissues, wearing down blood vessels, keeping your immune system permanently occupied. When your immune system is constantly busy managing this internal threat, it has fewer resources available for actual threats, meaning everything from fighting infections to repairing damaged tissue suffers. You feel it as constant tiredness, poor recovery, and a general sense that your body is just not working the way it should. But when visceral fat begins to dissolve, those inflammatory fires begin to go out. Cytokine levels drop. Immune cells that were locked in attack mode begin shifting toward repair mode. Damaged tissues finally get the conditions they need to recover. Blood vessels relax. Circulation improves. A study from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden found that just 4 days of intermittent fasting led to a 30 to 40% decrease in C-reactive protein, one of the most reliable markers of systemic inflammation, in people with high levels of visceral fat. That is not a small shift. That is a body-wide change in the internal climate, and it happens faster than anyone expects. There's another